this video, I'll show you how to weave on a tapestry loom. First, you're going to set all of the tools aside that you need for your tapestry loom. All we're going to need for the first part to warp is going to be the actual loom, so set those tools aside. And then I like to use a thicker yarn when I'm starting because it makes the process go a little faster and it's easier to see. You'll start by putting the yarn in between two of the teeth on the end, either end of the loom, and then tie a nice tight knot. It doesn't need to be incredibly tight, but you also don't want it to be loose. And then we're going to start to warp the loom by wrapping the yarn in between each of the teeth. There are many different ways to do this, but for your first go around, I suggest doing it this way so that you have nice long tails, and it just makes it a little bit easier to work with on this first go. Clip the yarn, and then you're going to tie that other loose end to the back side in roughly the middle of the warp. And then we're just going to be working with these top yarns. The rest of the yarns are going to be used as fringe later. So I like to put a little piece of paper so I don't get confused. Next, we are going to put yarn for the weft, the yarns that go left to right on this. This is called a shuttle. This first way I'm showing you is a way that some people like to work with the shuttle, but I prefer to just go around the long edges. This goes a lot faster. But if you are having trouble, you can try the other way as well. And then you can clip the yarn once you've got a decent amount on there. There's no specific amount that I can tell you that needs to go on there. And next you're going to take this popsicle stick and you're going to start to alternate going over under each sequential yarn. And then I'm going to be pulling the yarn through, removing the popsicle stick, and then going the opposite direction. So if the first yarn had been over, my next yarn is going to be going under. And then in order to continue creating a plain weave, you're just going to be repeating this process. So you're going to be going back and forth throughout the process. Now, as you're doing this, you also want to make sure that you leave sort of a C or a small loop at the edge of your fabric. This is called the selvage, and it's going to be the finished edge of the fabric, because you don't want this to tug the yarn so tightly that your weave starts to pucker in. So this is one way that you can start your project. I'm going to show you how you can also make this a little faster. You can take one of the other tools that you have. I've got another shuttle here, and I can keep that one in place the entire time. So I'm going to weave it the opposite way that I have the popsicle stick woven, and I'm going to shoot my weft through with the popsicle stick, and then I can pull that out, leave a little loop on the side, use my beater, and then I can prop up the shuttle and repeat this process, but then I can keep that shuttle piece in there the whole time. So this is optional, but it really does make the weave go a lot faster, and it starts to mimic what it would be like to use an actual table or floor loom or rigid heddle loom. And so this is highly recommended. It's really pleasant, makes the process a little bit smoother, and you can just continue going up and down. Additionally, this can also be where you use something called a header, which is a piece of fabric in order to start your weave. So you can continue this process to continue your plain weave. And I've got this sped up a little bit so that you can see how fast it can go. And this is one way that you can start your weave. I'm also going to show you how you can start your weave with the tail in the middle of your work, and this is a great way for you to switch colors of yarns and also to make sure that you have a nice finished edge when you're working with your weft yarns. So when you get to the end of your work, make it so that your yarn is going in the middle of your work, and then you can kind of just weave and tuck that loose yarn in between the other yarns. I like to go a little bit above the yarns, and that way I have a nice clean edge and I don't see any loose ends. Now I'm going to change colors, and I'm going to show you how you can start with this process by having the yarn in the middle of your work. And some people will tie off their loom yarns, but this is a great way to start. And I'm also going to show you how to do a basket weave. So instead of going under one and over one, I'm going under one or over two, under two, but I will have to have one end that is starting with just one yarn, since I've got an odd number of yarns. So here I'm starting so that my yarn is in the middle as if it were an extension of my previous yarn. And then I'm just going to replicate the same process that I did before, but with a different pattern. So this is a really fun way so that you can see more of the warp yarns and get a bit of a different design. Again, I'm always leaving a nice little loop at the beginning of, or at the edges where the selvage is, so that I'm not pulling the weave in too tight. And then eventually you'll start to see a bit of a basket weave design. You can also see that I have one yarn here that's sticking out the whole time, so I might have done something off with my weave, but maybe that also could be intentional. Really, weaving is whatever you would like it to be. It's very flexible. So I can come back in and fix that. It would be really easy to do, or I can just move to a plain weave to start to incorporate those yarns back in. So here I'm moving back into a plain weave that's just over one, under one. A basket weave is technically still a type of plain weave. And you can see that I have an end that gets lost there. So that means that I just need to switch so that my other setup is going to be where I start when I'm going from left to right, and then I will alternate that again with the popsicle stick. So feel free to look at different types of weaves that you can do. You can do a twill, you can do a satin weave, a basket weave, plain weave. There's so many different types that you can play with. And here you can see that I'm finally getting to the point where I can get that weave tucked back in. So again, this is your first one. Just start to get familiar with the process and getting a nice even weave as you are working, and then you can start to play with different patterns. When you get to the end of your weave, you can use the tapestry needle, especially if this is where you're ending your yarn, you've got just a little bit of yarn. You can use the tapestry needle to weave in and out of your work. And again, I just kind of like to loop my yarn around some of the yarns that are either above or below, give it a nice beat there. And then it's time to cut our fringe. So go ahead and cut all of the yarns in the center of your work, and you can cut those little knots off as well. And then there are so many different ways that you can finish here. I'm just going to do some really simple, quick options, but know that there are lots of other beautiful ways. One way is that you can braid your tassels or your fringe. Another way is that you can simply tie a knot. Try not to tie it too close to the top. Another way is that you can sort of ply your yarn, twist a knot, and then it will kind of be twisted there. You can also tie a knot closer to the base of your fabric. But note, since we have an odd number, that if you are putting your fringe into groups of 2, you will need to have one that has a group of 3. So that is one way. Another thing that you can do is you can get a stick or a piece of wood or a rod, anything that you can find really, and you can alternate how the fringe is connected, and then you can tie loops around that rod or branch in order to create a wall hanging. Again, there are lots of other more beautiful ways that you can do this, but this is where we're just doing some simple learning. And so you can you can cut all of these after you tie them off, you can braid them, you could add something called a raya knot, and then it will look something like this, where you can have a nice wall hanging with your woven structure. So I hope that this helped you understand the concept of weaving your warp and your weft, working with the tapestry loom, and good luck, have fun.